All right, folks. Well, I get such a hoot out of hearing that tune because that means it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on the forums edition of the podcast, where we're going to talk strategy. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Bluffsterini in the home game, and at RecPoker Jim on Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the RecPoker podcast every Monday night. So I have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. They are the official sponsor of the RecPoker podcast, and they are located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. And you can find out more about them by going to runaces.com. It's important that we thank our sponsors because most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, and we really depend on the support of our sponsors and our premium members who take part in our fantastic study groups, strategy sessions, book studies, all sorts of amazing ways to bring your game to the next level. And if you want to take your next step, you can always get a free account at RecPoker by signing up with an email address and a smile. But if you use the code RecPoker at checkout, you can get your first month of premium membership for only $5. And I know that you will agree that is the best value you can get for $5 in the Pokerverse. A whole month? We have so many training videos. We have different events going on every single day. Don't tell me you can't find something valuable in there for $5 for your first month. So come and give us a try. Now, you get used to hearing my voice because they let me host the show on Mondays, but I am just a small cog in the RecPoker machine. I depend, as do all the rest of us here, on our wrecking crew, our leadership panel, this group, this gang, this crew that makes all the magic happen here at RecPoker. If you want to find out more about me and the rest of the wrecking crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew. But just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them, well, at least a couple of the OGs of the wrecking crew right here on the show. Take it away, Rob Washam.
I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, I'm hosting a book study, and all RecPoker premium members are welcome to join.
And I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss, or as Gopherboy TJM at the RecPoker home game, which I stream live on Twitch on Wednesday evenings. You can find that at twitch.tv/RecPoker.
All right. So here on the forums edition of the podcast, every week we take a strategy post from the totally free to use and enjoy RecPoker forums and talk about it here on the air. So we're going to be talking about a post from 7high11, John Crowell, who's a very active member and has been for a while here. We've talked about a few of John's hands on the show already before about check raise bluffing from the blinds. John opens by saying, I've been trying to find spots to check raise bluff to try and bring in some extra pots. I'm finding some opportunities from the blinds when everything aligns well. Here's one that I'd appreciate some feedback on. Am I on track with this, or is it too dangerous of a play? So I just want to take a minute here to talk about this fantastic member, John Crowell. So John has been a member here for a couple of years. We've talked about him on the show before. He's submitted hands. I think he's come on the forums edition himself a couple times. And I just love this journey that John is on as a poker player. When he joined RecPoker, he was enthusiastic, but had a lot of leaks in his game, and he knew it. And he was not a bad player, but he was an inexperienced player, and he was looking for ways to improve. And the journey that he has been on since then, the way that he has developed as a player, the way that he's approaching the game now, the way that he's approaching the study of the game, is just so impressive that I want to just make sure that we shout it out here, because this is exactly what, the path of a thoughtful recreational poker player can be. You love the game, you want to get better, you join a community like RecPoker, or just start talking about poker hands with your friends. You find new study concepts, you find new strategies to work on, you build them into your game. And, we're coming on time flies when you get old like me, but like 2 or 3 years of John being a member here. And it's amazing. It's just amazing to see it. So congratulations to you, John. and keep looking for spots to improve, and keep sharing these hands with the rest of Rec Poker Nation, because you're doing it right, and it's great to see. So let's just get right into the spot here. This is a $15 Ignition sit and go. So there's 9 players, and the top 3 get $45 each. So it's like those old double or nothings from back in the day on PokerStars, but it's a triple or nothing, and it's just a flat prize pool. The top 3 players each triple their money, and that's all there is to it. It's an anonymous site, John says, but my HUD allows me to track players for each tournament. And all 9 players are left at this point. We're relatively early in the tournament, and we're in the big blind with a 5-4 of diamonds. So under the gun opens to 3x. It folds around to the small blind, who calls, and now it's on us in the big blind. John says, I already had the fold button checked, but did a quick look at my chart, which said this is a call from the big blind, and I got it unclicked just in time to think about it. I figure with the extra player in, the implied odds were a little better, so I went ahead and called. Now, I think this is probably a call heads up, 5-4 suited to a single raise. I just want to challenge John a little bit here. It's true that your odds are getting better, but your equity is getting worse when the third player comes into the hand. You are getting, the pot will be bigger. You'll be able to win a bigger pot, but you're going to win that pot less frequently because the third player has some equity in that pot that otherwise would go to you and the heads up player. Taylor, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think he probably just miswrote this. He probably wasn't actively looking at charts while he was playing this, because we would
I'm
never
sure he wasn't,
condone
because that's not
real-time
allowed, yeah.
assistance. But no, like going multi-way in these spots, we want to have cards that we don't think our opponents are going to have in this spot. And 5-4 suited definitely like fits the bill of hands that like work all right. It may seem a bit counterintuitive to others, but like this hand is way better for us than a hand like ace-5 offsuit. Like, we don't want to have ace-5 offsuit in this spot, ace-6 offsuit, like those types of things, going multi-way and calling from the big blind. But having something that's a small suited connector, something, that can flop really well, is those types of hands that we do want to play here. So we're getting a spot where we have to call 2 big blinds into a pot of probably 10-ish or so. Like, we don't have to win this all that often, and we're looking for one of those flops that favors our range rather than, an under the gun open range.
And when we close the action here with these kind of low suited connectors, are we doing this to make a pair, or are we doing this to make a hand that is stronger than one pair? Like, if we end up with one pair here holding 5-4 suited, is that a flop that we've hit, or are we really looking for very strong draws and 2 pair plus? Taylor?
We're going for quads and nothing less. It all depends on the board. Like, we have to pay attention to the dynamics of it. We're going to get into an example where I'm going to say hitting a pair is actually really good for us, but you can lay out a ton of examples where hitting a pair would not be good for us, because you can make the flop ace, queen, 4, all hearts. That's no good for us. We'd want to get away from it. But this example is going to be one that actually plays out where a pair is something that we probably feel relatively confident about. But we have to have a board that works for us, or one that is going to have strong enough draws for us to want to continue.
Rob?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think it's basically range, right? Does the board favor our range versus their range? So even if we don't make a pair, there are other cards that are going to be better for our overall range than it is for our opponents. So I think is making a pair good? I mean, if you hit a deuce, that's, if you hit a 4 or 5, that's kind of good. But like Taylor said, if it's an ace queen 5, I'm not feeling very happy about it. But if it's 7-6-5, I'm feeling a heck of a lot better. So it's where the ranges fit against the range that's opening.
Great clarifications. Thanks, guys. So John has a very detailed post here. Well, I'm just going to skip right to the flop here. So the flop comes 2 of spades, 5 of clubs, 2 of clubs. So we have the 5-4 of diamonds. So it gives us a pair of fives and a backdoor straight draw. So this is one of those above average flops for a hand like ours, and certainly for our big blind range as well, which is something that we'll get into here. So the small blind checks. Our hero plays in flow and checks, but with the idea, says John, that I might be able to represent a 2 with a check raise. And let's just talk about that a little bit before we get into the action. So, Rob, I think this is what you're talking about, where it's we have more 2s in our big blind calling range than this early position opener has. And so you're saying, even though we don't have a 2 in our hand, this still favors our range and we can represent a 2 better than some of the other players. Is that right?
Yeah, if you look at the overall ranges of both players, the opener is not going to have a lot of 2s in their hand. The small blind is not calling with a lot of small cards. Maybe, some small pocket pairs or something like that. But we talked about that in a previous forum post where pocket pairs are not that frequent. So the range of hands are going to be a lot of broadways, a lot of bigger cards, and a lot of, going to be a lot of stuff that is going to be totally miss this flop. And the only range that hit this flop very well would be the big blinds range. So basically we're talking our range against their 2 ranges, even if we don't have 5-4. If we had a hand like 9-10, this would still be a better flop for our range than it would be for our opponent's range. So that's something that you have to keep in mind.
I love that.
Yeah. The other thing to consider is 2s aren't that great for us. If we were to choose, what cards would be on the paired board that would give us the biggest advantage, it's going to be 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, like those types of things. We just have way more of those because we do fold a lot of our crummy hands that have a deuce in them. So that is something to be considered. But on a deuce 5 board, like we talked about, the under the gun almost has none. It's probably just ace deuce suited if they were going to play that. And then the small blind might not have any. It might be pocket deuces if they're trying to set 9 with pocket deuces. But other than that, they might not have any deuces in their range. So from that aspect, it's very clean. I just to jump to part of my conclusion, I take some offense to how John phrased this forums post, because he talked about check raise bluffing from the blinds, and we flopped a pair of 5s here in a spot where opponents rarely have a deuce. So are we really bluffing in this spot? I'm going to say very heavily, no, we are not bluffing in this spot. We have a value hand when we have a pair of 5s here.
I know how strongly you feel about having a pair of 5s. So I know that means a lot when you say that, Taylor Moss. So yeah, listen, having 2 5s is an extremely valuable situation to be in. You're right, Taylor. It's great when you have 2 5s. I mean, that's really, really important and fantastic. And if you look at this board, so they're not likely to have a lot of 2s. In fact, there's only 2 combos of ace 2 suited out there. There's only 2 combos of ace 5 suited out there because we've got a 5 and there's a 5 on the board. Maybe they have some better 5s than ours, but not very often. And so really the only hands that we're worried about are pocket 6s through aces. Those are the only hands that we're behind right now. Well, almost all the hands that we're behind right now. So it's just not a lot of hands that we're behind. I love the way our correspondent says this next line here. It says, I believe under the gun +1 has virtually no 2s or 5s in their range. I'm hoping to knock them off with a check raise here. I'm hoping to knock them off 2 overcards to deny their equity, or better yet, actually get them to fold a pair above the 5s. And I think that's exactly the way to be thinking about it. So, Taylor's saying, well, you're not really bluffing here because you're value betting. But it's that weird kind of value betting where you're denying equity. Like you don't mind, even though you're value betting, you don't mind folds because there's just so many combos of hands and so many turns and rivers that make our hand second best here. Taylor, you unmuted first, then Ron.
Yeah, and that's a huge point, and that's a great, like you talked about, John, and like, seeing his posts and going through these things, like to me, like underline that part of the forum post that he has. That's the big takeaway in this spot, and great to see him understanding that piece. But it's like we check raise to deny equity from overcards here. And you might think like, oh, is it all that bad? If they have two overcards, they're only going to hit them what percent of the time. But if you think about the like decision tree of like, hey, we're at a spot, what's the potential outcomes after this? If we call here, turn card is going to come out. It's very likely to be a card over a 5. And once that card is over a 5, it puts our decisions in a much harder position because we don't know exactly what overcards were we fading in this spot. And not only that, we have 2 opponents in this. So there's a potential of 4 potential overcards that could come that make us no longer have the best hand if that's the spot that we were in. So being able to deny that equity from our opponents is a huge priority for us here. And we're check raising as a value bet to deny equity. Like we are ahead and we are going to deny equity from our opponents because they may have 20% and they may not know it. But if we can get them off that 20%, that means we win 100% of the time. And those are the types of things that we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, Rob?
Yeah, I think, we talk about denying equity, and a lot of people talk about protection. They're betting for protection. And basically, when people say they're betting for protection, they're betting to deny equity from hands that could improve and beat you. So when you have top pair, and especially on a board like this, you have top pair, there are a lot of overcards that could crush your dreams, right? So I love what Taylor said it was about, and what John said, because he's denying equity and he's betting for protection and denying equity for those overcards that could potentially wreck his hand.
Yep. I love it. So John does go with the check raise here. So the villain c-bets 150 in the small blind calls. And this is where John talks about the range that he's putting his opponents on and his motivation for check raising. John chooses the sizing of 550 over the 150 raise or bet. And John says, I did this very much as a pure bluff, even though I understand that I may actually be ahead at this point in time. Hence, I'm sure a lot of people would call this a semi-bluff, but my thought was I'm really trying to knock him off a pair. So I consider it a bluff because I'm already planning ahead to shove on the turn if the turn is not a Broadway card or a club. So I really like the way that John's like planning ahead here. And whether you're ahead at this point in time kind of gets at that question that Taylor was talking about. It's like, yeah, you're ahead now. The other cards are behind, the other hands are behind you. But after almost every turn, you're no longer going to have top pair, and it's going to be a harder hand to play, particularly out of position. So that is a very important element of it. And I like that John's now sort of thinking, okay, so what's my opportunity on turns to barrel here and actually get an overpair to fold? And that's pretty sophisticated. And I think I like that he's thinking about what are the turn cards that will be better for my range, or what are the turn cards that are better for my opponent's range, and how can I continue on the other turns? So he says, anyway, I'm not really worried about the small blind. They also miss the flop a lot. They don't have very many 2s and 5s in their range. And John says, I would have preferred to go a little larger but I felt I had to leave enough behind, in this case 830, to have fold equity if I shoved the turn. And I think that's exactly the right thing to be thinking about as well. It's important to have a size that fits the street that you're on, but you really got to think before you take any betting or raising or calling action. One great thing you should do is just think, if I take this action, what's the pot size going to be and what's the effective stack size going to be? And should I maybe take a different action or a different sizing so that we don't get in an awkward stack to pot ratio size? So thinking about all the right stuff, the under the gun player calls the check raise and the small blind folds as we expected. The turn is the 9 of spades, which does bring a second flush draw. So it's 2 of spades, 5 of clubs, 2 of clubs, 9 of spades. And John snap shoves, trying to represent that I have a 2, he says. Now, I question the timing. Like the snap, I'm not sure the snap actually looks stronger than a slight pause and then putting it in. Some players fast is weak, some players fast is strong. I don't know how to make that judgment in a vacuum, but it's not clear to me that immediate shoves are not bluffs as often as they are value. I'm kind of curious to see what Taylor and Rob, I almost called you Roger.
Roger here.
Sorry, Roger. Why don't you weigh in there?
Yeah, we just talked about tells in our last book study session. It was Zachary Elwood's chapter, and there was a lot of talk about immediate. But now we're online, so online it's a little bit different.
Good point.
I seem to find that people are more likely to be stronger when they take their time. They let the clock run down. They sit in there, they let it run down. They're thinking really hard. They know what they're going to do. They knew what they were going to do the minute the flop came or the turn came, whatever. So they're trying to be deceptive, which doesn't really work. I don't know that I could put a lot of credence in the timing of a online tournament. So I'm not really concerned about the snap. And he could have taken a couple of seconds and done it, and I don't think it would have made a big difference.
Yeah, it just literally comes down to not what's the show that you're trying to represent to your opponent and how do you think that they're going to interpret it. It's 100% how is your opponent going to interpret these different actions, and every opponent's different. I think we're going to find out that, it worked in this specific example. But if I was in the villain spot and I saw someone snap shove into me, I'd be like, okay, cool. It was a flush draw. I'm going to call off. Because that's what I would perceive in that specific moment. If they took their time and then shoved, I might be sitting there, like Rob said, they were, fake thinking about this for a while and trying to get me to consider it. And they might have a 2. If it was me, I would not assume that they have a 2 when they snap shove into it, just based off of like timing tells. But that's me. You can talk to someone else and, they may see the snap shove and be like, it's 100% a 2 because that's how people play it in this spot, and then fold really strong hands. So it's 100% villain dependent on if you're trying to make some sort of timing play on how are they going to interpret that.
Yeah, sometimes I think, oh, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
I was just going to say it also has to do with the amount of chips that were left.
Yeah.
If this was situation where he had more chips than was in the pot, then I might have a different flavor for what he was trying to do. But he was betting less than the pot as a jam into the pot. So to me, that doesn't look as bluffy, I guess you could say. If he was putting in 2x pot, that to me on a snap would look really bluffy.
Yeah. The one thing about the snap that usually what I take from it is that this player had a plan for this street. So on the previous street, they had thought about, okay, what am I going to do on the turn? And they kind of figured on these runouts, I'm going to shove, and on these runouts, I'm not. We don't know what their options were, but that snap usually means it almost like ties the strength of their hand to the previous street. So I like that Taylor's thinking like a flush draw. That's a real, you kind of know immediately the hands that you're going to shove on, or maybe it's just you're always going to shove, or maybe you're going to shove every time the flush draw doesn't come in, or maybe you're going to shove every time the flush draw does come in. But those are very like the card comes and you know what to do and you take your action. The same might be true if you had a 2 in your hand. It's like, okay, if the flush draw doesn't come in, I'm going to shove. Okay, boom, instant shove. But I think it is so you have to like know players and get a sense of what, like you were saying, Taylor, what their interpretation is going to be. But a very wise man named Rob or Roger Washam, I don't remember which, said great advice to me, which was just every action, just take your hand off the mouse. Just take your hand off the mouse for 5 seconds. Not only does it eliminate these little pseudo timing tells, who knows if you're giving it off one way or the other, but it also stops you from just making really stupid, boneheaded decisions in those 4 seconds before you do it. Like, use that time to visualize, okay, let's just pretend I did just shove. Now, do I feel really stupid? Like, am I thinking like, oh, wait, what if they have this? Like, put yourself through that. Take your hand off the mouse. And it's pretty nitpicky stuff. But unless you feel like you have a good read on how your opponent is going to judge the snap, then there's just no reason. There's no reason to have it in your arsenal, especially if you feel like you're only doing it when you're bluffing or you're only doing it when you're value heavy. That might be something that you're just not cognizant of. And that's not something you're going to see in your Poker Tracker 4 review either, because those aren't timed hands. It's not like a video. So 5 seconds, take your hand off the mouse, just standardize that for yourself and give yourself that opportunity to just avoid those silly little punts that we all do from time to time. Or maybe it's just me, but I've benefited a lot from taking my hand off the mouse for those 5 seconds. Okay. So the turn's the 9 of spades. John shoves. Villain tanks 15 seconds or so and then folds and turns over the rockets, pocket aces. John says, I got that little rush of having executed a plan and had it work perfectly. And he says, to be clear, I would not have tried this on the majority of Ignition players, but somehow I had a read that this player was better than average and could fold an overpair. And that's a great note to have on some of these players. And it's like, we go through these cycles of learning and you can really only, we got to choose very inexperienced players to bluff or very experienced players to bluff. A lot of those players in the middle, they've learned just enough to find some reason to justify a call. Mostly what we want to do is call. And there's a lot of information out there that's like, oh, well, if he was doing it like this, or if this was the sizing, or, oh, did they snap? Because then you should totally, there's a good reason to call. But I think that's players that are good enough to know how to fold are definitely better targets for spots like this. And then the last thing that John says is, I always try not to be results oriented. And I review both winning hands and losing hands. But I'm feeling pretty good about this one. And I just don't want to be feeling good about it because I'm being results oriented. So I'd appreciate some feedback. So again, just, way to think about it in all the right terms there, John. Rob, you unmuted first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to commend John for thinking to this level of where he's at. Because like you said in the beginning, we've known John for a long time, number of years, and watched his progression and watched him as he gains new spots, new plays that he would never even think of. He got fortunate that this was not one of those people that get married to pocket aces, obviously. So that was a very good read on his part. I just want to commend John for the thought that he put in this. And one thing that came out to me is a lot of players play each spot individually without thinking about what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. And what John did here is he started out with a plan pre-flop. When he called it, when he called that in the big blind, he thought, well, this could be an opportunity for me. And he looked at ranges. He looked at the range based on the flop texture and where he was in the hand, and realized that as long as that wasn't a Broadway or bigger card on the turn, that he still had range advantage and he could make the play that he was planning to play. Now, if the turn had been a jack or a queen or a king, he shuts down. He made that very clear. So he had a plan based on how the turn happened, or what happened on the turn, and he executed that plan. And that shows a lot of determination, a lot of study, a lot of confidence in your game, which is something that he has really, really achieved in the couple of years that he's been here with us at RecPoker.
Yeah, and check raising is a really important concept that I don't think gets a ton of attention, even though it should. Like, I had flashbacks because you're talking about John and like his poker journey as he's learned more. I was thinking back to, I forget how long ago it was, but I was just posting my random thoughts on Twitter one day, and I was like, I feel like I should be check raising more. Like, I only do it when I have good hands. Like, I should be doing this more, right? And the answer from people were like, yeah, you should. You don't always just in certain spots. And like, I had the flashback here because he was like, hey, if I check raise, I represent a 2, which is that very simple, hey, I'm going to only check raise when I have really strong hands. Otherwise, I'm just going to try and get to showdown. But we have to check raise more. And if you look at this hand, the one that John picked, it's actually a really good situation from many different aspects to go for a check raise. It's got the board run out that really favors our range and not our opponent's ranges. And he broke down all those reasons. Secondly, we didn't talk about this too much, but it was a multi-way pot. And in a multi-way pot, when we're closing the action on the flop, it actually is a really good spot for us to be raising quite heavily to get the other players out of the hand. We talked about the bit about equity denial, and that's part of the reason in those spots we go for those types of things. But another good spot for us to go for that check raise. So it's hey, we had, kind of 2 good reasons for, the board favors us, plus this situation favors us. And then we looked at our cards and it was yeah, these cards are ones that would benefit from a check raise here, and we executed on it. So we saw kind of those 3, big areas for us to execute the check raise, and we went for it. And I would just say hey, think about more spots like this. Where are the other spots where we're seeing boards that favor us, situations and how the hand is played up until this point, and do we have a hand that can check raise to go for more spots like this? Because it's not just a 2 on this board. It's, flush draws, it's straight draws. It's sometimes for the bluffs, it's, backdoor draws or, some overcards that are definitely behind, but are trying to bluff out other hands that have them beat at this point. So it's think about some of those spots and break this down, because this is a good example here for this one specific spot, but we can take that and we can leverage that into other areas and kind of grow.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, I think as part of that, most recreational players don't find enough check raises. They want to just get to showdown with this pair of 5s. Maybe I can get to show. Maybe I'll win with my pair of 5s, or whatever it is. And keep in mind that because of that, most recreational players, if they face a check raise, they feel that person either has 2 pair or a set. What else could they be check raising? Because that's what they would be check raising.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind when you're looking for those check raise spots. Look for the ranges that, like Taylor said, your backdoor straights, your backdoor flushes, your range versus board texture situations where you have the advantage, and use that to win more pots.
Yeah, and I'll just say explicitly, one of the things that Taylor was getting at there, our hand also benefits from the aggressive action here because we benefit from protection. Like we actually have a made hand here, and there are very few good turns and rivers. So it's a good range for us, but our hand also is incentivized to make this aggressive action and to get some folds, to add some fold equity. So I think this is a really good microcosm of sort of like the check raising theory specifically. We're talking about ranges that favor us, the ways that our hands are incentivized, how the ranges miss our opponents, and also our opponent types. Those are all going to be, and stack depth. We didn't really talk about that much, but stack depth should be one of the factors that you consider when check raising, because you have to think about, do I have enough chips that I can leave enough behind to threaten a stack on a future street if I decide to fire again? Or do I have few enough chips that this is actually a check raise shove, and I'm still going to take this line as more of a one and done than a 1-2 punch? Or do I have such a stack depth that I actually don't have enough fold equity in either of those cases? Maybe it's a call, maybe it's a fold. Maybe you shouldn't have put yourself in this spot in the first place. So a lot of this, like thinking ahead, having a plan, and these are all good factors to consider. All right, so we got some great responses here from Eric Jin, who goes by Binkley, from Keith Brandt, who goes by Monkey System, some fantastic Wrecking Crew members with some really well thought out responses. They both broke this hand down in various solvers. Eric broke it down in Range Trainer Pro, and Keith broke it down in GTO Wizard. And again, you can just click the link to see how those solvers play these particular spots. I'll leave you with one last line from our correspondent as he closes his forum post in a comment down below. He says, "Thanks for the responses, guys. If nothing else, this gives me confidence I'm starting to think about the right things in the right way, even if the moves I'm making aren't really refined yet. This is a play I never would have considered 6 months ago." And I just want to say, yeah, man, we love to hear that. We love to hear that here on the show. And, we're talking John up quite a bit here because it warms our hearts. John's typical of a lot of these RecPoker Premium members who have gotten more involved over the last few years or the last few months, depending on where they are in their own poker journey. And like, folks, there's resources and peers and mentors here that can help you take your game to the next level. And poker is a game that the more you study it, the more you will enjoy it, the more you will understand how much more there is to study. It's a game that you can work on for a lifetime and still have more to learn. So don't get intimidated by it. It's easy to get better. And most of the players listening to this podcast will find some ways to get better here at RecPoker. So do check that out. And if you enjoyed listening to some of the analysis from Rob and Taylor, or if you click on the link and you enjoy what Keith and Eric have mentioned, I will just say that a lot of our Wrecking Crew members offer one-to-one coaching or group coaching. And if you are trying to take your game to the next level, getting some personalized feedback on your own leaks, the mistakes that you're making, the resources that would be best for you to take your game to the next level, it's really invaluable. And none of us are going to live forever. Get better sooner by getting some help from a peer or a mentor or a coach, like I say here at RecPoker. So if you go to rec.poker/coaching, you can see all sorts of great folks there that want to work with you to help you improve your game. And I think the rates that people are charging are like crazy competitive compared to some of the other coaching rates out there. And you're going to get some excellent advice from some of these Wrecking Crew members. So yeah, don't hesitate to give us a ring there, folks. And one more shout out to John for his fantastic post. Rob, Taylor, anything else that we should add to this before we roll on out of here? I don't think so. So thanks to Rob, thanks to Taylor, thanks to John, thanks to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and thanks to you, the listeners. We wouldn't do it without you. So thanks for tuning in to another week of the RecPoker Podcast, and we'll see you next week with Telethon. Good night.